Robert Gilmore LeTourneau was born on November the 30th, 1888, to French Huguenot immigrants from Vermont, who actually were part of the Brethren movement, interestingly enough. And we are excited about that. From very humble beginnings, Mr. LeTourneau, with only a 7th grade education, imagine that, built a business empire designing and manufacturing gigantic earth-moving machines that helped win World War II and create the highway infrastructure of modern America that we all enjoy and are thankful for. By the end of his life, LeTourneau had almost 300 engineering patents, and he had given 90% of his wealth away, and had been doing that all along in what is often referred to as the reverse tithe. That commitment, by the way, to give his money away was based on a previous commitment about being God's businessman, which I want to tell you about in just a little bit. In his early years, LeTourneau became one of the leading spokespersons for the lay-led faith and work movement in the mid-20th century. He was one of the co-founders of CBMC, which now claims 90,000 members worldwide. And along the way, he founded a university in Longview, Texas. But you may not know this, but he almost missed his calling. As a young businessman whose sister had gone off to China after the Boxer Rebellion to be a missionary to China, she chastened him about his lack of commitment to Christ. And it wasn't long after that, after no small amount of wrestling with God over what he was going to do with his life, he went to a revival meeting at his church and decided to dedicate his life fully to Christ. And that commitment, he assumed, was going to lead him out of business and onto the mission field, out of a business that he dearly loved, because he believed that going all out for God, like most people of his day, believed that meant becoming a preacher or an evangelist or a missionary. He decided, first of all, though, to go to talk to his pastor, and they prayed together. And fortunately, and amazingly in some ways, his pastor told him, you know, Brother LeTourneau, God needs businessmen as much as he needs pastors and missionaries and evangelists. And in response, Mr. LeTourneau, who was a very concrete man, said, all right, if that's what God wants me to be, then that's exactly what I'll try to be. I'll try to be his businessman. And so with God as his partner, Mr. LeTourneau went on to design and build enormous earth-moving machines using technology that was years and sometimes decades ahead of its time, and became known as the father of the modern earth-moving industry. LeTourneau's inventions played a huge role in World War II, which was called the Engineers' War. His machines comprised 70% of the earth-moving equipment used by the Corps of Engineers and the Seabees during that conflict. As LeTourneau's success grew, he believed that this made him a debtor to God and to his fellow man, which translated into quality work, bigger and better machines, and both spiritual and physical commitments to his employees. For example, he was one of the first business leaders to employ full-time workplace chaplains in his plant. And he developed new product lines when business got slow so that he could keep his plants open and men employed. And he took personal responsibility for any of the business failures. You know, no one ever accused Mr. LeTourneau of thinking small. He would often remind people there are no really big jobs. They're only small machines. Interestingly, he did drive a Volkswagen around the property. And he was a rather large man himself. Now, somewhere in the archives, there's a picture of this Volkswagen that he unfortunately parked behind one of the machines one day. The student that was testing this machine put it in reverse and backed straight over that, thinking Mr. LeTourneau was actually in the bug. He panicked, but he had gone out when thinking, okay, I'm going to get kicked out of school. And Mr. LeTourneau, he found Mr. LeTourneau just dying laughing on the other side of the machine. LeTourneau saw the intrinsic value of his earthly inventions really quite in a remarkable way. He said, if there's no logical explanation for my development of the digger, which you see here, there is a theological one, and it's available to all of us, even the weakest. By accepting God as your partner, there's no limit to what can be achieved. And with God as his business partner, Mr. LeTourneau did go on to do amazing things and become a huge risk taker, although he was careful to try to never presume upon God. One of the risky ventures he was involved in was building the first movable offshore drilling platform for a young Texas oil man. And LeTourneau told Mr. Bush there, which you might recognize in the middle, that he didn't have to pay for the contraption if it didn't work. Bush 41 later described LeTourneau as a kind of George Patton of engineering. He said, if that guy's got that much confidence, then I'm going to place my confidence in him. The Scorpion actually did launch in 1956 into the Gulf of Mexico, and it worked. And Mr. LeTourneau got paid. And by the way, there were a couple of future presidents there at the christening. Can you recognize those guys? Bush 41 and 43. LeTourneau really had a very brilliant and practical mind, and he developed, quite frankly, a remarkable theology of work for his time. He said, he wrote this, listen, when God created the world and everything in it, he didn't mean for us to stop there and say, God, you've done it all, there's nothing left for us to build. He wanted us to take off from there and really build for his greater glory. Sounds like Genesis 1:28 to me. LeTourneau believed that ingenuity to build, and his ingenuity to build, really came from God. He said, no one can measure the inventiveness that Christ awakens in a man's soul because it cannot be measured. At a speech in Peoria, Illinois, where Mr. LeTourneau had just opened a plant, he told the Chamber of Commerce, now I ask you, what's the use of having a religion that won't work? If I had a religion that limped along during the week and maybe worked on Sunday or while you're in church, I don't think I'd be very sold on it. I think I'd turn it in on a new model that works 7 days a week. One that would work when I was at church, in my home, or out at the plant. And that's what Christianity does. He said, what's remarkable about this is that all the resources that we have today that describe what it means to follow Christ in the workplace did not exist in the 30s and 40s and 50s. And all Mr. LeTourneau had was the Bible, but he had another secret weapon, and that was fellow business leaders that banded together to really teach each other and explore what it meant to do business for the glory of God. LeTourneau always felt that he was clearly called to business. And he believed that the workplace, the marketplace, was his mission field. And he was arguably the most recognized Christian business leader in America in the mid-20th century, earned the moniker God's businessman. And it was as God's businessman that LeTourneau pursued his reason for existence, to glorify God in his work and to spread the gospel message. LeTourneau's ministry, however, was not limited to his business endeavors. He was one of the early investors in a young evangelist named Billy Graham. Graham had met the LeTourneaus when he was a student at Wheaton. That contraption that's behind them here is actually a giant dome that Mr. LeTourneau designed for Billy Graham's crusades, which actually Graham never used because he outgrew the thing so fast. But that's now houses some of the LeTourneau equipment that's building machines now on the plant there in Longview. If you ever get to Longview, we'll show it to you. And so Mr. LeTourneau also went on as one of the first practitioners of business as mission. His projects in Liberia and Peru encompass both economic as well as business and economic concerns. He was also, on his own time, he also traveled around the world preaching and sharing his testimony as God's businessman and telling others about his call to serve God in business. And many a young person in his audience felt that God also called them into business as well. Mr. LeTourneau always believed, however, that his lasting spiritual legacy would be in the college that he and his wife founded in Longview, Texas in 1946. And as the only Christian university founded by a business leader, the integration of faith and work has always been part of the DNA of LeTourneau University. Mr. LeTourneau made sure of that at its founding. His vision of a faith that works 24/7, that's as alive on Monday as it is on Sunday, continues to thrive in LeTourneau University's 23,000 alumni and through other Christians around the world through its Center for Faith and Work, which I'm privileged to lead. We proudly continue the legacy of R.G. LeTourneau of claiming every workplace in every nation as our mission field. He was an incredible man, and we celebrate his legacy gladly.